Hello, listeners of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, here with my co-host, Marie Mayhew. Marie, how's it going?
Oh yeah, going pretty good. Going pretty good. I'm all ready. I'm all ready for this episode.
Already good stuff.
I balanced my checkbook.
Nice.
I got all the coins out of the bottom of the sofa.
Oh wow, good times.
Sofa. I'm all ready for money.
That's really good. That's
money,
really
money,
good.
money.
Listeners, before we delve into this episode, I just wanted to take a quick couple of minutes here to ask that if you have a couple of dollars lying around, to please consider donating to the KRSM 2018 fundraising drive. KRSM is a radio station here in the Twin Cities that our show is a part of, that we like to partner with because of all the great work that the station does with young children from communities that aren't normally given access to media and aren't voices that aren't normally heard out there in the world. And specifically the work of middle and high schoolers here in the Twin Cities that get to come onto KRSM, create radio novellas, documentaries, and other kind of pieces of journalism that are being told from the point of view of kids, young people from communities that you wouldn't normally hear. So there's a couple of youth-led shows here on KRSM. There's First Gen, there's Coming to Minnesota, Student-Powered Radio, Tea Talk with Charlie, Thinking Out Loud, and Awkweird. Those shows are great. They are produced by kids, young people from the community here in Ramsey County, and it's just a wonderful program that I'm really happy we get to support. So if you want to help to continue the work that KRSM does in putting the voices of young people out there, please consider donating. You can donate at krsmradio.org/donate, or you can text KRSM to 855-735-2437. If you're a patron of the show, then you've actually already donated, although you may not have realized it, because we gave all of our Patreon money for the month of August to KRSM to help them with this fundraising effort. So again, please consider donating, and if not, of course, that's fine. Thank you so much for listening to the show. And now let's get into it, Marie.
Woohoo!
Speaking of financial crisis.
Speaking of money and what happens if you don't take care of it.
This is a topic that we have considered doing for a long time. It is a topic.
And by long time, it's been like 2 or 3 weeks.
No, this one, honestly, this one has been on my list of topics since like the first week of the show. So I have a couple of topics that I've always really wanted to cover that I knew would take me a long time to research. And honestly, this stuff, I still don't feel like I had enough time to research it, even though it's been like 2 years since I was planning the show out. But this series, we're going to be talking about economics, the history of economics as a discipline, some of the big ideas that are out there, and also about the conspiracy theories and ideas surrounding the coming economic collapse and failure of the United States dollar in particular.
Yes.
So it's a topic that's really spread out. There's just so much here that it's going to take a long time.
You could major on it in college.
Right. You could write an entire thesis.
Go on to have a career in it.
It's almost like it's an entire field of study that neither of us are prepared for.
Oh my God. It almost is.
Almost is.
Almost.
So
close, but it's not, yes.
This episode, we're going to talk about in particular, kind of the current state of economics and economic conspiracy theories. We're going to jump into the 2008 financial collapse. What is some of the differences between fiat money and kind of a hard money system? And then we're going to jump into, with later episodes, how did economics develop? Where did we come from in terms of the United States economy, and how can we actually effectively look at these conspiracy theories of economics and be able to say to ourselves, does this make sense? Does this not make sense? So,
and how close could we ever come to a true economic collapse?
Absolutely. So let's get right into it, Marie.
Welcome to the Mad Scientist Podcast.
So, now, I don't know So I don't think we've ever actually talked about the 2008 financial collapse, Marie. Not really. Not together. It's not something that comes up, I guess, a lot.
No, it's not. I
Um,
mean, it's yeah, 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 yeah. Because most of our viewers were probably, our listeners were probably pretty young when it happened too.
Yeah. So
is my
actually,
guess.
I remember when it happened. The financial crisis, the Great Recession, is as it's become known, occurred in 2007 to 2008, and we're still feeling the effects of the Great Recession.
Yes.
You know, in some ways, we're still, in some ways, in terms of real money, in terms of real growth that people have felt at their jobs, we're still really reeling from the effects of the Great Recession. In terms of the overall economy, though, we have come back in some ways.
We've come back, but we haven't learned all of the lessons that 2008 should have taught us in a lot of ways as well.
No,
which is, the idea of bubble, something being a bubble economy, too big to fail, things along those lines. We still haven't really fully gotten our heads around as why they could be dangerous.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I remember being, so it occurred, like I said, 2007 to 2008. I remember being in high school when it occurred. I remember specifically because my mom works for a major bank. We're not going to say which bank, and we're not going to say what kind of job she does. But my mom worked for a major bank, and I remember when it occurred, basically my mom basically saying, well, my retirement plans have been off put by 10 years, right? Because she was one of the, what's the word? The retirement funds of many of these people that work in banking, and a lot of people across the country really, are mostly paid out to them in the form of stocks and bonds and things.
Yes.
Specifically company stock. And if your company was one of those ones that was hit really hard, then, basically your entire financial future was wiped out in a terrible way.
Yes.
So, Marie, why don't you run us through quick the history of this Great Recession?
Well, I remember it really quickly because I lost my job. I was laid off.
Oh, wow.
I was working for a financial institution. I had been there for about 6 months. And when I went in for the interview, one of my big questions is, when did you have your last round of layoffs and what was the effects? Right. And they were like, oh my God, no, we are totally fiscally solid. It would take a major, we're not even worried about it because it would take a major, some major act that we couldn't even foresee to have layoffs. Right. I kid you not, I want to say 8 months later, laid off.
Dang.
From that institution. And during that time, I did not find full-time work for I want to say a year. So it was I think of the effects, it affected me personally. I live in the Bay Area. It affected the Bay Area tremendously. It was just sort of this weird shockwave that there were all these indicators that it was coming and no one really paid attention to them.
Mm-hmm.
So technically it's marked by the stock market crash. That was September 29th, 2008. The Dow Jones fell 777 points in one-day trading. And that was the largest, until recently, that was the largest point drop in history. And it plummeted because Congress at that point had rejected a bailout bill for the banks. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the high water mark of what triggered the markets, what triggered investing groups and professionals to all of a sudden really become alarmed, and that is sort of what opened opened the floodgates for everything that happened afterwards.
Right.
But it's before that, it goes back, years. I mean, basically 2007, there was a huge amount of concern around loans for homes and mortgages. And that basically banks were offering money to people that didn't really have enough money to pay back loans. So if in this, and again, this is something that happened to me personally. So this is so much fun. We get to relive the darkest days of my of my young life through financial collapse. Yay! And I will say that this is something that happened is people going to buy a home, going to buy their first home, their second home, whatever it is. They were offered. You go in and you are offered, unless you have cash to put down, you are offered a mortgage loan. So you can say, hey, I'm going to take a loan for, I'm just going to make up this amount for $100, and I am going to pay it back over time with X amount of interest. So the good thing is if you can afford that $100, right? So if you make a job it is $125, you can make that loan. However, a lot of the banks were offering loans that were definitely more than that. So, but without you having the money in the bank or the wherewithal to pay that. So when we went in to apply for a mortgage, we had a certain price range, right? And we were like, we know realistically with how we save money, how we spend money, and what our savings and earning potential is in a household. And I'm going to make up this dollar figure. It's $50, right? When we went in for a mortgage, they were like, you qualify for, for a 500.
Right.
500. And we'd be like, no, we can afford 50. And they're like, no, look, we're going to give you 500. So it's sort of this amazing quadrupling effort of like, you could buy a home and basically sign on the line that is dotted, but you didn't really have that money. And you didn't have the earning potential to get to that money. So this is also subprime. And subprime is I am going to make a financial offering to a group of people that do not have the wherewithal to pay this back.
Right. So what they literally mean by subprime is you have a credit score.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically that credit score is tied to some intrinsic risk that is available, that is part of your kind of financial makeup. Mm-hmm. So a bank knows that if I loan, let's say Marie has really good credit and Chris has terrible credit, right? Chris has a bad credit history, doesn't pay his loans, doesn't do anything, whatever. The bank knows that if I loan the money to Chris, I have to basically double the amount of money I think I could lose because I might lose this money.
Right.
Whereas if I'm loaning to Marie, I know it's a safe bet. I'm only going to charge her a small amount of interest.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
What the bank
yes.
So what the banks were doing was basically they decided beforehand they would never give out these what are known as subprime loans, which are loans given to people that have bad credit or a history of no credit or whatever, in such a way that there's no way they can cover this risk spread.
Right.
Whereas suddenly it became advantageous to take on risk because you could then trade risk away.
Yes. But the idea is, I think, again, where you start to see the bubble growing and where you start to see things starting to go sideways is you see it in your personal debt with like credit cards, which was subprime. There was a whole subprime market for credit cards. But then also in buying homes, which is sort of this larger, much more long-term investment. So if I sign a loan for something that basically I can't afford, I'm going to be on the hook to pay it back a little at a time until a certain point where I'm going to owe a lot more money than that loan was actually worth. Yeah.
So, and that's what's known as basically an economic bubble,
Yes.
which basically is, and there have been a couple of notable economic bubbles in the history of the United States alone. Probably the most famous one is the tech bubble. But,
yes.
Well, that was the most famous until the mortgage bubble. The claim, another bubble that's on the horizon is the education bubble. But what a bubble basically is, it is so the way that money is traded in the United States today and across the globe generally is our money is not, and this is something we're going to get into more, our money is not set to a fixed valuable asset. which would be a hard money economy. Now, what that means is I have, let's say back in the early days of economics, the early days of civilization, I had a goat and you had a whatever. I had a goat and you had lumber. And I was like, well, I can give you one goat for 15 bales of lumber. Right? Let's do the trade. That was how an economy was created, was trading and a mercantile kind of economy. Right? Or not mercantile, but a
barter-based.
Barter, exactly. A barter economy. Eventually, though, the things that were traded for were not things like goats and, whatever. It was valuable assets. So things like gold or silver or copper or gemstones. Those were considered intrinsically valuable because they didn't corrode, they weren't lost, whatever. And it was always considered strange. Philosophically, it's very strange because who cares? I would much rather have a goat or a thing of wood that I can use or whatever,
Copper.
than a useless piece of metal. But it, for some reason, gold took off as the major economic item, gold and silver in particular.
Yes.
And so what governments would do is they would issue gold and silver coinage out to people. Eventually, that started to be replaced by what's known as fiat currency. Now, the original fiat currency actually goes back a long time. The first fiat currency, as far as we know, is from China in the 11th century. Specifically, the Song Dynasty, where they issued paper money known as jiaozui or jiaozi. I can hardly say that, but and this is described in the travels of Marco Polo in the Yuan Dynasty, because the Song Dynasty's money actually failed because of inflation. Something else we're going to talk about. The Yuan Dynasty was the first to really use it as a major medium of money, and Marco Polo says, quote, "All these pieces of paper are issued with such solemnity and authority as if they were of pure gold or silver. And indeed, everybody takes them readily, for wheresoever a person may go throughout the great Khan's dominion, he shall find these pieces of paper current, and shall be able to transact all sales and purchases of goods by means of them just as well as if they were coins of pure gold." Now, the reason that was the case was because the paper was tied to gold. It was tied to silver. So if you traded this away to someone, whatever, you could go to a government office and say, "I want to trade this paper in for gold."
Yes.
And so they would,
which is still not exactly fiat, but yeah.
No, it's not exactly fiat, but it's close.
But it's like early. It's like
exactly.
Proto fiat. Yeah.
Now, one of my favorite stories about this actually is that the first. Do you know what the first type of money that was traded in Canada was, Marie, or in New France, as it was called?
The loon.
No, it was beaver pelts.
Oh, well, yeah, that makes sense.
The beaver
pelts, yeah. For hats. Yeah.
The beaver pelt was basically their version of gold. And so the government, they ran out of gold from France to sell or to give to the people. And so they actually started chopping up bits of playing cards. And that was used as money for quite some time. Anyways, that's neither here nor there right now. The basic idea, though, is that eventually, and we are going to talk about this in more detail, money became separated from
something of value,
a physical item of value.
Real value. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so today we have what's known as a fiat currency system. A fiat currency basically is something that it's given out by a government where the government says, "We promise to use this as a means of collecting taxes, of paying things, of whatever." And so the government sets, basically it's confidence in the government that sets the value of this item.
It's faith.
Exactly.
It's faith in the governing body. Yes.
Now, that means, though, that the worth of that money changes based on the faith in the government or the stability or the value of the commodities that it can purchase, which is known as inflation. So, for instance, a nickel used to be able to buy you a thing of bread, whatever. Today, a nickel gets you nothing, right? A thing of bread is, $3 or whatever, depending on how much expensive bread you buy, like my wife and I buy, because evidently it's like a penny a grain. Ridiculous.
Fancy. It's fancy bread.
Anyways,
Yes.
So what a bubble is then is the market decides or people decide that the value of something is actually far greater than its real intrinsic value. So for example,
Yes.
I'll give an example of like Pokemon playing cards. Okay.
Oh my God, yes. Beanie Boos.
Okay, exactly. Yeah. When I was a kid, a Pokemon playing, like, the value of a playing card is limited, right? How much money is a Charizard card worth really in the real world? It does nothing for you, right? But people are willing to pay thousands of dollars for a brand new Charizard Pokemon card from the first generation of cards. Okay.
Which is crazy. It's
Which is-
ultimate supply and demand.
Which is crazy.
Yes.
But
it's like baseline economics. If you have something of value or perceived value and there's a demand for it, you will command more of whatever it is that you're trading for it.
Right. Now, that is a very simple kind of transaction. It's like a one-to-one thing. But what started happening in economics was banks decided, well, actually, we could start selling. Basically, we could start changing and charging people for how much we think something will be worth over time. So let's give an example. This is a little complicated, but the first
You're
version,
just jumping right in.
the first versions of this were things like, say, corn or oil, right?
Right.
So let's say
Yes.
I know how much oil is worth today,
Yes.
and I think that in a month or in a year, the price of oil is going to drop by $100 a barrel. And I say to you, listen, this is what I think is going to happen to oil. I'll pay you, or I'll sell you my oil at, 110% of its worth today. But I'm going to sell it to you for the next year, every month.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of that trade, I'm losing money. I'm losing 10%. But if oil drops by 50%, then I'm making money after oil drops.
Right.
Okay. In the
Yes.
same way, if a commodity's price rises and I decide to buy it for cheaper today, then I'll have made money in the future when it's
Right.
when it's
When it
actually
goes up.
going up.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
What people
Like a good example is like corn. If you buy corn and there is a drought,
Yes.
right? Corn becomes more scarce. You are going to make more money because you had the almanac and you predicted a drought,
Yeah.
right? So it's being able to look at a certain commodity or a certain, I would say mostly commodities, at a certain thing and saying you can predict some of the future of what that item will be worth.
And so these ideas created basically a secondary market on top of the original commodity market, where now people were buying and selling what amounts to the risk in the commodity's price. So
It's basically gambling.
it is literally gambling.
It is basically like if you do not know what something is going to do, but you're going to put money on it based on an outcome, gambling.
Yeah, pretty much. Where we started to get into challenges, or where basically the problem starts to come into play here, is where at the moment, so the instantaneous value of something far outstrips its actual value over time. So for instance, during the tech bubble, there were companies that looked like they were going to make billions of dollars in 10 years. And so people were buying their stocks like crazy. And the stock prices were just going up and up and up and up. But then what happened was, in a year, that company collapsed because it really had nothing valuable to sell to people.
Right.
So
Or its business model was just not tenable.
Exactly.
Like pets, at that time, pets.com is the best example of that, where they're going to sell pet food and deliver pet food to you and other pet accoutrement to you at a very cheap rate.
Yeah.
And they That's like the cautionary tale
Right.
that I
Right.
always remember.
And so what eventually happens then is when the actual value of the thing, basically when the market corrects itself and the actual value of that item comes into focus more and more, people start realizing, oh my God, I overpaid for this like crazy. And the market just collapses. All that money gets lost because you wasted, $10 million on pets.com stock. And now
Yes.
pets.com went under.
Pets, yeah, and pets.com as a company are just as, again, a cautionary tale. They're maybe not necessarily spending their money in the best way either, because they are having to hype the company, right? So they
Yes.
have a lot of money in marketing, a lot of money in kind of the idea of the company, but not in the actual running of the company. Like, how much does it take to deliver huge bags of dog food for free? How long can you do that before you realize you don't have any money as a company?
Right. Another good example of this is our Kickstarters, right? Imagine, people put in, it's approximately the same thing, really, besides the fact that you get stock or not, or whatever, right? Someone tells you, I have this great idea for a product, and I'm going to sell 1% of it to you for $5. Well, if there's loads of people who want to buy that 1%, they can start asking for more and more money. But there's no guarantee that what they're selling is any good. And if they're a good enough salesman, if they're a good enough con person in some ways, then they can basically cause you to buy it for $100 when it's really worth, a penny.
I would say with Kickstarter, you do have an idea that there is inherent risk.
Of
with
course.
With a bubble, or especially with like the tech bubble or things like that, you don't see it until it's almost too late. That's why it gets out of hand.
Right.
There is no moderation. There is no like guidance or governing anything that's telling you this could be a problem, or that these are the things that should be looked out for. It just occurs, and you're like, oh my God, I've got to buy that puppet from pets.com.
Right.
That's so cool.
Right.
I need that right now. And whatever, yes.
So
Oh, God.
what eventually happened with the financial crisis was that the value these loans were being traded, the risk on these loans was being traded away and away and away. And what happened was when people started defaulting on their loans, they stopped being able to pay them because they were subprime, right?
Yeah.
These people had no, again, like Marie was saying, we can afford 50. You gave us a loan for $500 where we have to pay $150 a month or whatever. There's no way we can pay this off, right?
Right.
When people started to default, the interest rates went up to try to cover that risk. And instead what happened was people were just like, well, we literally cannot pay it. There's no value here, right?
Yes.
So anyone who spent money on those loans by trading the risks away, or the bank that was holding the loans or whatever, was suddenly faced with the fact that, oh my God, we basically gave away this house to these people. They can't pay it anymore, and there's not enough demand for houses. So if we take the house back, what are we going to do? We basically we just gave away free money.
Exactly.
Like idiots.
Yes. But a lot of these people too that have all this debt against them, right? So I signed away my life for, and I'm supposed to be paying back 150, and I could only afford 50. That debt, like Chris was saying, was considered, that loan was considered at one point an asset. So it would be bundled with other like loans that were similar to it and bought by other banks. So my mortgage, it was under Jones Mortgage Company, could be bundled with other subprimes and sold to the Smith Bank. So all of a sudden, my mortgage was held by a different company. So whether which may or may not have any kind of accuracy of records about how much I owe, when is my due date, am I eligible for refinancing, sort of all the details that are important to walk through and know about and retain when you are getting a mortgage, could also be lost. And this is happening like every day, hundreds and thousands of times a day. People's debt was being traded. which again is inherently confusing because if you think about it, you already have something that doesn't make sense that's building on a faulty premise, which is subprime, right?
Yeah.
That you're going to take in money that eventually these people aren't going to have. The idea being they're going to be so in debt that they're going to have to pay that money back and it's just going to take them longer. But what, like Chris was saying, the thing that nobody anticipated was that they just weren't going to be able to pay it and everything would collapse. But take that and combine the fact that you're doing a 3-card Monty with it and playing Where's the Lady, and basically no one knows where the holder of your debt is. So now it's just sort of this big blender of confusion that is setting up a near economic collapse in 2000, coming up on 2008.
Yeah, and so to try to, I guess, step back and explain it a little bit more. So this money stuff like this, it just confuses the hell out of me. So it's one area where my brain is just, I can't. If it's energy and photons and whatever, I'm fine. But if you turn those, that energy from kilojoules to like $1 million of oil or whatever, I'm just like, I don't even know what I'm doing. So
weird. It's
really weird. I know.
Anyways.
But so the general idea here, what these banks were basically doing was, like Marie said, they were bundling mortgages together.
Yes.
In a way that they were saying to another bank. So here's a very simplified example of that, or a simplified explanation, I guess. I loan money to someone and I tell them I'll give you $100 and in 10 months you pay me $120. At the same time, I owe Billy down the street $120. What these banks were doing in a way was saying, well, I don't have the $120 right now, but that guy down the street owes me $120. So you know what, guy down the street, you now owe Billy $120. I don't know. I'm out of this transaction. Okay. What I have essentially done is I have removed all of the risk from myself that Billy or whatever, the guy down the street, isn't going to pay me that $120. And I have transferred all of that risk onto Billy, who I owed that original money to.
Yes. But at the same time, Chris, you would also be buying debt. So I would be coming to you with the exact same
deal
scenario.
Yes.
Right? So, and this is going on. It's just, maybe it's a slightly different amount, but like, I bought the debt from the person you sold it from.
Right.
And now I'm going to sell it back to you.
And so imagine that there's like 5 of us and we've all loaned money to people who will never ever, we all know that, John down the road is never going to be able to pay this $120 back.
Right.
And we all think we're smart by selling it or giving it away to another loan shark. Right. And so we're all like, haha, we're getting one over on that guy. But then it's just the same 7 idiots trading each other's debts back and forth to each other. And then imagine now the prices of all those debts. Like, let's add another layer of complication on top of that. Every time I trade my debt away to someone, so I say, John owes me $120, I'm going to trade it to Billy for $120. Billy is like, okay, I'll do that, but you give me $10 today.
Yes.
And every time I do that now, like basically that original debt gets traded around that circle of people so many times that at the end of it, I'm trading it for like $100,000 and it's still only a debt of $120.
Yes. But
so
you've inflated it.
So I have inflated it. And then John comes back and says, well, I can't pay it, whatever. All of a sudden now, the actual value of that debt comes into focus and we say, oh, it's worth $0. Oh my God, I paid $100 I paid $200, however much I paid for it, for nothing. I just lost a lot of money.
Yes.
That is essentially what happened here. Everyone was like, they were trading these debts back and forth being like, oh, it's just risk, whatever, it'll get paid eventually, who cares? And then everyone was like, we don't have any money to pay this debt off. And suddenly the banks were like, we traded each other nothing, and none of us have any money left.
And none of us kept track of what we did have.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So
it's insanity.
everyone, it's like I said, it's like a big blender. No one can tie back with any kind of accuracy, like how much money they actually did spend. As Chris said, like, I'll give you that $10 now. Well, that money's all gone. So all the money we did have that was sort of underpinning and securing the banks was lessened to begin with. And we took on all of this debt that is now this big black cloud of, that does not have any kind of tie to anything or any kind of clarity, which is really scary. And again, it's something that only I feel like that is inherently sort of a modern trading, a modern 20th century creation, right? It's like, we're going to take debt. I'm going to figure out, like, we haven't even gone into like what a derivative is, which is basically taking whatever that is and coming up with some crazy algorithm to trade the debt. So I'm going to, like, I'm a day trader. I could find, hey, oh my God, Chris just took on all this debt from Billy. I'm going to trade on it, and I'm going to, sell it short, saying that he's not going to have that money, or he's going to have that money.
Right. It's like,
so you have all this like insanity happening within the financial market of people basically betting for or against that the market will crash, that you will either be able to pay the debt to some extent or not pay the debt to some extent. And that just everything like thermonuclear cleared it out. And then all of a sudden people realize, oh, we don't have any real money. We have no real security.
Right. And that's an underlying problem that we haven't really touched on yet, or we kind of keep coming back to it. We haven't made it explicit yet. Is the fact that people, because they were giving away these mortgages for nothing, basically, people were building houses like crazy. So there were more houses than there was demand for houses.
And like all the construction that goes into that. So think about, you have to buy the land, you have to pay for the builders, you have to pay for the equipment that goes into it and the goods that go into it, right? You have to create a whole, you're building communities. So like all of this money is being poured into something that is going to not be actualized in a lot of ways too.
And so the old way of thinking about economies was that all of that stuff that they went into that house will always have its intrinsic value. So basically the saying was that the market clears itself. So if there is supply out there, the market will eat up all that supply regardless of how the economy is doing. But that model though could not explain depressions and recessions. And so when Keynes came out and said, well, no, that's crazy, what happens instead is you make so much supply that demand drops, and then the value of that supply just goes to nothing. And that's essentially what happened here. Was the houses, there were so many houses that it actually, banks were buying homes and demolishing them because it was cheaper to not have a house on the land than it was to have to worry about the electricity and the gas and everything else and whatever.
Yes.
It's crazy. So
at a certain point, the Bank of the Federal Reserve, which we will go into at some point, but basically just think of them now, if you don't know anything about them, is they're the governing body that is in charge of America's money in a lot of ways, right? And it's like when stuff begins to swing too far one way or too far the other, their job is to try and get it someplace that's tenable, in the middle. I think it's the best way of trying to explain it, right?
because our money is not linked to an intrinsically valuable asset like gold or silver or whatever.
Right.
Basically the government. This is the government body that decides this is how much a dollar is really worth.
Yes.
Right. And this is how we can pay for it and whatever. And again, further complicating all of this is that the United States after World War II, and we are going to get into this more. We keep saying that. We promise we will. The United States government's dollar.
People are like, I like the one where you guys talked about cats.
I know. I know. The
When
dollar.
are you guys going to do one on cats again?
The dollar of the United States has become basically the de facto currency of the world.
Yes.
So, so
Yes.
what the United States economy does is very important. It's taken on more of an importance than just the whatever. So, anyways, continue, Marie. I'm sorry.
So it's important for the Federal Reserve to kind of keep things moderated, right? So all of a sudden, this huge blender, black cloud debt comes in, and in late November, Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson basically said, you know what, we have to purchase. The Bank of the Federal Reserve has to purchase some of this debt. Right. So we have to clean some of this stuff out. And as one of the things that we have to do is we're going to have to clean it out. We're going to have to buy it and just take and kind of take the hit and just say, you know what, America's going to buy this debt to try and clear out what's happening and in hopes that it will just go away. But the problem with that is it just ultimately made the problem worse because you're not solving the issue, and you have the Federal Reserve trying to bail it out and not working.
Yeah, right. You're essentially saying, because again, it's all a house of cards, Marie. It's all made up.
It's all house of
like
cards. You can't just move it. Like basically
no.
that affects your gross, your GDP, right? So the gross domestic product saying, hey, we're America, and we can say that we are worth this much money and we do this much because and our dollar should govern and is sort of the de facto, as Chris said, it's the de facto currency that everything's measured by because our gross domestic product supports it, right? So what we are outputting as a nation of just whatever that is, whatever it's, commodities, whatever that looks like, is this. But when you start to say, hey, we're gonna buy some of this toxic debt back, it's shrunk our product slightly. So it ended up making the problem that much worse because it weakened us. It weakened the fact that the dollar was strong.
Well, here's the part that I don't understand, though, right? This is why, basically, the ultimate point of this episode is to say this is all intensely complicated, and so in the vacuum of information,
balance your
sense,
checkbooks, kids.
In the vacuum of common sense, and and just like sensible operation that is the banking industry. Conspiracy theory has bloomed.
Yes.
Right? But
yes.
what I don't understand is, okay, the government, the money that the value of a United States dollar is ultimately set by the government, but that is set by how much actual product the United States people produce.
Yes.
Right? So what always just kind of blows my mind here with economies generally is, and this is going to sound super naive and stupid, and I know it's not this simple, but like everyone is like, we are going to destroy each other because we all owe each other money. Mm-hmm. Why didn't the whole world get together and be like, you know what? We're just not going to worry about it.
Forgive our debt?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Why not? Who cares?
Well, because
like
they're not going to forgive debt because one, then we would have to say that there was a problem to begin with. So I think with everything that is actual economy with what happened, there's this huge ambiguity and emotional reaction to stock markets, to financial situations, to any kind of scare or any kind of bubble. It's created from people that are not logic based, that are emotionally based, right? So, and I think that is part of the complication with this as well, is that you can't just sort of say, well, we're going to forgive it, because one, then what does that do to American currency. If they just forgive American currency, their currency is as strong, that then their currency becomes as strong as ours, sort of on an emotional level too.
But that's okay. But that's
America was never going to let, basically that was just never going to happen.
But
The Feds was never going to give that up.
Sure. But you know what I'm saying, right?
Sure,
like,
sure.
like we're all trading. Everyone has as much
Well,
product.
we'll take loans. I'm sure we took out. I'm sure we took out
we absolutely
huge
did.
amounts of loans.
We absolutely did.
And stuff.
It's just like to me, it always seems like with all of this, with all of these economic things, and this is why I think it is so easy for conspiracy to flourish, is that
I would agree.
It seems like a bunch of just like stubborn jerks who are basically saying, I know I owe you $10 million, but this guy owes me $100,000. And so I'm going to burn both of our houses to the ground. Like just forgive it. Just who cares? Just move.
Right. Well,
you have as much money as you had. Like you have as much real stuff that matters as you did before. If
What happened though?
It is kind of what happened, but I guess oh god, it's okay.
Well, so what kind of happened after that was the Federal Reserve Chair said, you know what, for us to come out of this, so we tried to buy some of the debt, right? We tried to reshuffle this deck of cards, this house of cards. It's not working. We're going to have to bail out. We are going to have to actually, instead of buying the debt, we're going to have to give money directly to the people that are losing it, which are the banks. So what happened, again, to sort of spur this decision, and again, I think we're really simplifying this, is that Lehman Brothers was a financial institution. It was a very prestigious financial institution that traded I'm trying to remember exactly everything that they did. Well,
they made money off of. It's crazy. They made money. They made money off of other people trading money to each other, and then it's crazy. It's ridiculous. They were basically built on nothing. Like all these companies, they were built on nothing. It's a comedy about nothing, Marie. I'm getting so heated. I'm so annoyed. I'm getting so heated.
Well, the thing with that is, at that point, right? So they came to the government and said, look, we are very close to having to close. We're very close to going out of business because of all of this that was happening. And we need your help. And at that point, the government, Bank of Federal, the feds were like, no, you know what? Go ahead, fail. You're going to fail. So they failed. They closed their doors. And the stock market freaked the F out. That, again, Dow dropped. People were freaking out. The banks are going under. There was a run on the banks. So again, if you see your bank close, if you see a big financial institution that's been, publicly traded, blue chip stock, Wall Street's darling, that has been there since your dad and grandpa wasn't banking, close, it's going to trigger a reaction that's emotional. And that emotional reaction, sort of like Chris becoming irate, could be a run on the bank. So I could freak out and I could be like, oh my God, the banks are going under. I have to liquidate. I have to get all my money out of the bank as quickly as I can, because I might lose it. Like, what if they close their doors and all my money is there? I won't be able to get it. I'll be broke. I'll be poor. So, but if you have a run on a bank and you have all these people running and having that reaction, that's exactly what will happen.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is a self-fulfilling conspiracy theory, right?
Yeah,
they saw that this was happening. The government saw this was happening and said, you know what? We can't have this happen either. So we're going to have to bail out. We are going to have to bail at least a portion of these banks out. And that, starting in 2008, September, almost a year later, was the beginning of what is kind of known as the big bailout, where Bernanke sent a bailout bill to Congress. It is what helped bounce the Dow back. But then I think the Senate voted against it. And so, there was just like all this panic that when you have inconsistency or uncertainty in a financial market, it will cause this type of panic and things will just get worse.
Yeah.
So when they finally passed it, the bailout, people were, besides myself, jobs were being lost, money markets were down, things were getting a lot worse. So I think we barely came out of this. And Chris, you can kind of maybe talk to that. I'm now the doom and gloom. I mean, but things were like really not good, and we were coming close to a collapse.
Yeah. So basically, what occurred here was the government bailed out these big banks, right? And so the financial market stabilized eventually. But the problem, and I think this is really what a lot of people feel still today, and I definitely, I think, agree in some ways, is that, okay, Wall Street is fine now, right? Wall Street has gotten better, but the actual purchasing power, or the actual real wages that people feel in their homes, has not changed, has not gotten better. So, great, the banks aren't failing, and all these idiots who have been trading made up money to each other for the last 10 years since the collapse. Wonderful that they're feeling better about themselves, right? But
and that they all got like $1 million bonuses.
Exactly.
CEOs got $1 million,
wonderful,
multi-million bonuses. Yeah.
Wonderful. But they've decided now that they're not going to trade with us anymore. Right? They've decided that now, all of a sudden, because they were too stupid to realize it back then, that actually risk is so risky that, we're not going to give out loans anymore, and we're not going to help whatever. Like, it still hurts people today who are trying to get a loan for a home, or are just trying to use their money to pay for goods and services, right? So
exactly.
Wages have not raised. Wages have not gone up really significantly to match how good these companies are doing, because the companies are still, I think, very frightened by, it's almost like when your dog scares itself, or, your dog farts itself awake, right? That's kind of how I would say this occurred. Like, the banks were like, oh my God, we're idiots. And then they woke up for a second. They were like, oh my God, we're idiots. We're all idiots. And then the government was like, you're not an idiot. You're okay. And now the banks are like, oh, thank God we're not idiots. Oh, it's all those people. It's all those blue collar workers who are idiots. It's very easy to see, I think, that, or rather, they scared themselves so badly with this, and caused such a dip in the market and a dip in the money, and it showed just how shaky our markets really are, that then the banks now have almost taken, or the companies generally have become more conservative in how they spend money, in their outlooks for the future. And all that is done, it has not hurt the CEOs. All it has done is hurt the workers who are at the bottom, who now the companies are saying, well, we don't have enough money held back that we can pay you more, or we don't have enough to pay your health insurance adequately, or yada yada yada, right? Because what if we fart ourselves awake again, basically?
Well, and we still don't learn the lesson, because they're predicting like the next bubble will be education.
Oh my God, of course it will. Of course it will.
It'll be like all of like people again, and you can start to see it. You start to see like early, kind of like little early waves and early indicators of, to pay for college, they took out this much money, which now they have to pay back
but they'll never make that much again.
Never make that money back. Yeah. And so again, it's like you will default on education loans. It could have the same type of ripple effect that will not be as big as like a housing market, but it'll still have the same, it still shows that we haven't exactly solved this problem.
No, well, we have this,
of what to look out for.
We have this viewpoint almost where, so federal student loans you're not allowed to default on, but it's like, what are you gonna do to stop me? You know what I mean? Like what do you get? How
Well,
you
I'm
can't
sure,
get
like,
you can't get
yeah.
water from a stone, right? Like,
No,
what are you
no.
gonna do? Oh, I can't. Oh, I have to pay this back. What? I don't have any damn money. So what are you gonna do? You know what I mean? What? Oh, okay. It's like when your mom, what was it? You know, when you were a kid and your mom was like, this is a bad example, but we went out fishing the other day with one of my friends who's now here in Minnesota, and he was getting water from the lake for us to fill up a thing that we were fishing. We were fishing, so we wanted to have a thing of water where we could put the fish to unhook them and whatever. But so he was like teetering on the edge of this rock. And I was like, if you fall in the water and die, I'm going to be so mad at you. Right? And it's kind of the same thing here, I think, with this economy, because it's like, if you default on this loan, we're going to come after you. And it's like, well, if I don't have enough money to pay it, then I don't know how you're going to come after me. Like, I wish you luck selling all my video games for the $100,000 I owe you. But if I haven't done it yet, I don't think you're going to. So, anyways, okay. So, suffice it to say, this is a little bit complicated.
Well, and it's just rife with, like, for something that should be, like, again, economics has some rules. Like, there are certain things that are done, there's certain things that are, there's certain definitions that hold over time. There's a history to it. But then there's all this wackadoodle emotional response to
right.
stuff.
Well, people
is just crazy.
Yeah, and so in that space of uncertainty, and I think I think the average person, I know I certainly had this view. I think the average person has a view that the economy is there. It has to be based on something real.
Yes.
It has to be based on something. I know we're not on the gold standard anymore or whatever, but there has to be some reasoning behind all of this stuff, right? And
right. My paycheck is worth something. When I put it in the bank, I'm okay.
And
it's self-interest.
And what the Great Recession, I think, for a lot of people showed was it kind of pulled away, the smoke and mirrors of Oz and showed it to be the little man, him to be the little man that he really is. It kind of pulled it all away and showed, well, actually, all of this is just based on the good feelings of a bunch of bankers, right? There's nothing holding this all together, because look at how easily it could fall apart.
Exactly.
And so conspiracy theorists, folks like Alex Jones, folks like Ron Paul, let's say, for example, whose star certainly rose with the financial crisis, people that were prepping, preppers, things like that, it suddenly became a very real possibility that the economy might collapse.
Yes.
The flavors of this conspiracy theory are varied. There's all kinds of different versions of it, but the general idea of the economic conspiracy theory is the government or the value of the money for some reason will drop to such an extent that it will become worthless. Once money becomes worthless, then it's only folks who have real hard money, things that they can barter for, things like gold and silver, things that hold their intrinsic value, that will be able to survive. That's the basic idea.
Yes.
The reasons that these economic failures happen, or these crazy, runs or whatever occur, are varied and very complicated. But the general idea is, if you want your family to be okay, then you need like 4 things. You need food, you need water, you need some precious commodity that will not lose its value, usually gold or silver, and you need guns. Right? Those are the 4.
Way to protect yourself.
Those are the 4 that become really the most important to this whole idea. Right. And so in the wake of the Great Recession, conspiracy theorists just kind of blew up. And, folks like Alex Jones now pulling in all this money, selling supplements, selling guns, selling MREs, selling whatever. It's become a very, very common and very popular conspiracy theory. So In this series, what we want to do is trace the history of money, trace the history of economies from their beginning, talking about all of the other permutations of these conspiracy theories as they've occurred over time, and eventually coming to a point, hopefully, where at least I'm not as angry as I am right now, Marie. We'll see what happens.
You'll be angry. It'll just be about different things. That's all.
That's true. That's true. And so, since this is our run-up to the Halloween season, dear listeners,
Yes.
we will be having bonus episodes on little creepy tidbits as they come up.
Ooh.
And this is all culminating in our October series on demonology.
Oh my God. I'm
Very
just so
exciting.
excited about that.
I can't wait!
I can't wait either.
All right.
It's almost here.
It's almost here. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. We wanted to give a quick shout out to our new patrons this month. We have
Yay, patrons, giving
Alejandro.
us money. We won't squander it like the government does. You're
so
welcome.
good stuff. We have Jason, we have Chris, Jason again, and Alejandro. Thank you so much for becoming patrons of the show. You guys are great.
Woo!
So that is again, just Jason, did not give a last name. Very exciting. Chris Coniesco, I hope I'm saying that right. Jason
Coniesco.
Wissinger, Alejandro Rojas, great friend of the show, great guy. Go check out his series on YouTube and all of his stuff. He's wonderful. One of the best UFO researchers out there. Just generally one of the greatest, I think one of my favorite writers out there right now.
Alejandro.
Alejandro
Love
is the
that
man.
name. That's
It's such a good
awesome.
name. And so if you would like to donate to the show, please consider donating to our Patreon. Give us ratings and reviews on iTunes, Facebook, everywhere. And
Yes.
thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.